All right, fight week. Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. It's finally going down. And it brings us to a couple of questions. The first one, Brian, I'm just going to throw right at you. If Errol Spence Jr. beats Terence Bud Crawford, what happens next?
There's a rematch clause in this contract, which we know, which we've talked about. But I think that if Errol Spence wins, that rematch probably happens at 154 if it happens at all. Because Errol Spence has already talked about, I don't know if I can make 147 anymore. Like he's talked about just like the strain it has on his body. And I'm paraphrasing. That wasn't a direct quote, but paraphrasing what he was saying. And he's hinted at a couple different times potentially moving up at 154. There was even the rumor before this fight finally got made, Errol Spence versus Keith Thurman, but at 154 with no title on the line, which that pissed me off. And I was like, this cannot happen. I remember talking about that shit. I was like, this cannot happen. So I think that Errol Spence, this is potentially just my assumption, his last fight in this weight class. But ultimately, I do think that a rematch will be warranted because money talks. These are two of the biggest names in the sport, two of the best in the sport. And whether or not we have unless it's a blowout, but even so, I think we'll probably get a rematch because this is just going to call for it financially in a way that Mayweather and Pacquiao probably did, but that didn't end up happening again. And honestly, I didn't feel like we needed to see it again. I feel like this is going to be close enough and good enough and entertaining enough where we're probably going to feel like we need to see this again.
I think the difference is I do believe this is comparable to Mayweather Pacquiao, but Mayweather Pacquiao, we got way too late, right? These guys, Bud and Spence, are still doing their things. They're still the kings of the division, and they haven't lost it just yet. They're getting older, but they still got it. So I think it's a
Right.
total different fight. As for in terms of if Errol Spence Jr. is able to get the victory over Bud Crawford, yeah, they're definitely going to have a rematch in this one. We heard Spence talk about moving up to 154. I think this fight would still be at welterweight though. If they were to do the rematch, like that might be in the clause that it might have to be a welterweight bout. Who's to say? But both of these guys can make a lot of paper. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And hey, listen, if they have two fights, we also recently just saw Canelo and Triple G have a trilogy fight. Some of the greatest fights you've seen trilogy fights. You've seen that series. So I think this could
Although
potentially
that third
even
one
have
wasn't great, to be fair. But
no, and Triple
yeah.
G didn't look good. I mean, in historically, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
when
yeah.
there's been trilogy fights, not just that particular fight.
Yeah.
But I think there is a possibility just because these two guys can make so much bread fighting each other three times that there's a possibility. Because if, like we're talking about right now, if Spence wins the first one, then Bud wins the second one, there would have to be a trilogy fight. There's no way. However, say if Spence wins both of them, then there's no reason to have a trilogy fight. Say the first one is kind of close or really, really close, then of course they should have the rematch. But either way, I think either one of these guys are going to activate that rematch clause. So I do think there is going to be a rematch for this, but I think Spence has a really good chance. I know Bud is the favorite, and we are going to get into the betting portion of this as well. You'll be able to find that. But I think Spence has a really good chance in this fight to beat Bud Crawford. And if he does it, then I think he also goes down as one of the best welterweights in boxing history. Like when you actually take a look at his resume and what Spence has done, he's going to be on that list of some of the greatest welterweights of all time.
I want to mention this also. Ring Magazine pound for pound rankings, Errol Spence is fourth right now. If he wins this fight, and I think most people will probably have him 4, 5, 3, 6, sort of in that range, like not quite 1 or 2. Errol Spence wins this fight, he's probably number 1 in the world. I
Who
think
are the
that's
top
important.
three? Who are
I
the
think
top
that's
three?
important to know. Well, right now for Ring Magazine, they have, and I disagree with this. 3 is Terence Crawford. I have him number 1. Second is Naoya Inoue, who we talked about extensively leading up to his fight with Stephen Fulton. He's number 2. And number 1 is Alexander Usyk, who I think is probably 3, 4, somewhere along those lines. I'm
Oh,
not
no. before, but I will have to get into our pound for pound rankings.
Like, I gotta think about that more. I probably don't have Usyk over Errol Spence, as a matter of fact, in terms of pound for pound.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Probably don't, because I mean, like, Alexander Usyk, yes, he came in with a huge amateur pedigree and was a world title contender right away at cruiserweight. But Errol Spence has beaten a lot of, like, if you go through his box rec and if you just sort of reflect on his journey that he's been on at welterweight in the last 6-7 years, now it's pound for pound. So Alexander Usyk has done it in multiple weight classes at this point, right? So that's sort of his advantage. But I think, regardless, Errol Spence, he wins his fight against Terence Crawford, there's going to be pound for pound #1 in the world Errol Spence talk going forward. I think he's going to be in a lot of people's top 2, top 3 minimum if he's not there already, and he's probably not. But I think this is what this fight will do for him, because Terence Crawford, pound for pound, is just a higher ranked fighter because of what he's done, multiple different weight classes, was unifying at lightweight, was undisputed at super lightweight. So I think that him being undisputed now, being Terence Crawford, like, he'll just cement himself as pound for pound #1. But Errol Spence, if he does that, then it'll work in his favor as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the big conversation coming into this one is whoever wins this fight is going to be pound for pound the king of boxing, #1 on that list. So of course, if Spence gets the victory, there's no doubt about it. And then it's interesting to see what he would possibly do at 154 pounds if he was to move up to 154, because I mean, I know he's called out Charlo, right? That's a big fight for Texas. That's Dallas and H-Town. And listen, Charlo's got his hands a little bit busy with a fight coming up in September. But I'm saying that this is a fight that we could possibly see at 154 as well, because I think that's a money-making fight as well. And hey, listen, you never know what can happen at 154. I'd rather see him and Charlo rather than him and Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman hasn't fought in a while, but I still have him ranked in the welterweight division.
Yeah.